Well, hey, everybody, it's so good to see you as we continue in a series that we've called Playlists, where we're taking in person each week a modern song, and we're using it to actually set the platform to talk about one of the minor prophets, the 12 books in the Bible in the Old Testament that were written by the prophetic writers. They're smaller books, and often they're books that many of us have not either read or studied. It's been so interesting over the last 3 weeks how God has spoke to us through them, and I believe He's going to do that today. Now, I want you to know we have one more week left in this series. That'll come up next week. I do want to encourage you, if you're exclusively watching online, we have so much more that we're able to do live and in person, and really, we're blessing everybody every week. We want you to be here. We want you to get blessed, and so if you can be with us in person, make plans to be with us next week. And as we wrap that series up, I want you to know where we're going. We're going to start a series called On the House. And I'm excited about this because we're bringing in speakers every week to share with you. They're friends of the house. They're friends of mine, friends that love our church, that have served our church. And they're going to come in each week with a message for the house. I'm excited about what that's going to be for the next few weeks as they have prayed. And these are great leaders in great churches all across the country. And I'm excited about what that's going to mean for us for the month of August. Now, I want to review just kind of, if this is your first time, really where we are in dealing with the minor prophets. You know, the story of God's people is really a story of God's faithfulness, but often God's people choosing to rebel against God. And as they did that, from amongst the people, God would raise up a prophet. And prophet had one job. They would share the word of the Lord with the people of God. That's what they did. And as God would speak to them, they would speak God's words to His people. And there was an intention. It wasn't just like, I'm going to make a point. And I've told you before, you can make a point or you can make a difference, but you rarely get to make both. You know, what you see in the prophetic writings, that God intended to use the prophets to turn the hearts of His people back to Himself. It wasn't just God was trying to make a point. God really wanted to make a difference. If you read through them, you'll see it. You're doing this, and if you don't change, this is what's going to happen. But I want you to turn back to me, and if you do, then there's mercy and grace. In the Old Testament, the major prophets were Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, and Daniel. The major prophet title didn't mean that they were more important. It actually meant that they wrote a majority. Now, there are 12 minor prophets that follow their writings, smaller books, often 3, 5, sometimes even 1 chapter. And these smaller books actually contain such significant, rich messages for us today. We grew up learning about some of them. The book of Jonah, Jonah and the whale. Jonah, who's called by God to go to Nineveh, doesn't want to because they're Syrians and they're the ones who conquered the northern kingdom. And he knows that if he does what God tells him to do, they're going to turn, they're going to repent. And God gets him there. That's the story of the whale. And then they do. They repent. And at the end, he's frustrated. He's mad. It's such a great little book, and it's a phenomenal story in the Old Testament. Jonah was a minor prophet. In the first week of this series, we looked at the book of Micah, and we saw that in a time of economic prosperity and increasing disobedience, feels a little bit like our day and age, Micah invited the people of God to live justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God as the world changed around them. Micah 6:8. We looked at that verse out of that book. Then we looked at the book of Obadiah, this book about those who have power and those who are victims. And we looked at really this prophecy against the Edomites who watched as Babylon destroyed the kingdom of Judah. And Obadiah shows us that God holds supreme power. God is all powerful, and He will ultimately right the wrong things in this world. And last week, if you weren't with us, we looked at the book of Joel, and the book of Joel is set in a time of suffering when the people of God feel like God is maybe distant and hasn't heard. And Joel reminded us that God is faithful to fulfill His promises even as we endure a season of suffering. It's been good. Now, today, we're going to look at the book of Habakkuk. Now, to understand the time period when Habakkuk was writing, the northern kingdom has been conquered by the Assyrians. And it's, the history, we've walked through this. It's hard to understand the minor prophets if you don't know the history. There's been this division among God's people, the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. And the northern kingdom really was they tried to kind of walk away from some of the things of God. God sent the Assyrians to take over. More than likely, by the time Habakkuk is writing, the Babylonians have now come in and conquered Assyria, and now it's the Babylonians that control the northern kingdom. And they're sitting there in the kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, watching all of this happen, as they were so disobedient, and God sent a foreign power to conquer them. I was reading, and Dr. David Baker said this as he was reflecting on it. The kingdom of Judah, the southern kingdom, had witnessed the downfall and exile of her northern sister Israel slightly more than a century previously. She herself, the southern kingdom, had not learned, however, that repeated violation of the covenant with God on her own part would not be left unpunished forever. She would now, according to the prophet Habakkuk, be faced with a similar fate herself. A lot like the book of Joel, Habakkuk is set in a time period when he's looking around and it feels like this life is so broken. Things feel like they're just falling apart. And it really, for Habakkuk, has to do with the Babylonians. Having seen their conquests around, and they were brutal. I mean, we read about Babylon in Daniel and the lion's den and those kinds of things. They become, in some ways, childhood stories that we don't read them, but they were brutal people. I mean, think about throwing young men into a giant furnace and sentencing a young man to be eaten by lions. I mean, they were brutal. They would come in and they would destroy cities and nationalities. They would come in and they would take and literally plunder all of their assets. They would take the most promising young men and they would ship them off and enslave them. I was trying to think of a modern day comparison that we could look in our world and understand the brutality that would have been in the Babylonian regime. And the only thing that I can think that we're familiar with that would compare to it is ISIS. The militant Islamic regime that took over much of Iraq and Syria and the Middle East, and they were brutal. You probably read the reports about what happened with Christians. They would come into communities, and if you were a Christian, you would be targeted. There were times that they were drug out into the streets, and there were fathers that were killed in front of their family for just simply confessing faith in Jesus. They plundered assets. I mean, there were literally museums that held artifacts that were significant that they just came in and destroyed them. No regard to the significance of what they had. They were brutal. They murdered. And it's sometimes we just need a story to connect to that. And the story that I've told several times would be the story of Kayla Mueller. This is a picture of Kayla and her mom. It feels a little bit like, for some of us that have kids, you're looking at a mom and her child. Kayla was somebody who had traveled and done humanitarian work. And when all of this started, she felt compelled by God to go overseas and to serve. And in the middle of great struggle and with a lot of danger to herself. And so she goes to the Middle East, working with several humanitarian groups to serve the least of these in this world as ISIS is coming into power all around her. And if you don't know the story, she was eventually abducted. She was eventually, because she was an American, she became a slave to one of the leaders of ISIS. And you can imagine what that would have meant. She smuggled out a letter with a young girl that she had become friends with, and it was sent to her parents. And if you read that letter, it's so profound. The writing is just all over the page, and you can tell she's writing in duress, but she writes of her relationship with Christ and how in the middle of that great darkness, that she has come to see the light of Jesus in a different way. And it's such a profound letter. I would encourage you, if you have time, to pull it up. I remember hearing the story that she had been killed when her parents were frantically working through diplomatic channels to try to get her out. That she'd been executed as an ISIS combatant. You know, those stories were happening all around the prophet Habakkuk. He's watching all of this evil, the Babylonians who are brutal all around it. It hasn't come to their house yet, but he's wondering a question that in a world like ours, many of us ask. How can a good God allow this kind of evil? In this simple 3-chapter book, God answers a lot of our questions. He actually shows us, these are 3 things we're going to look at today in this message, that when we have the right attitude, it's okay to talk back. How many of y'all get mad at your kids when they talk back at you with an attitude? Habakkuk is going to talk back to God, and he's going to do it the right way. I want you to see that as we look in this message. We also see that when the world feels out of control, God is still in control. I'm telling you that we're going to see that, and that God is going to show Habakkuk. You don't see it, but I see it. I'm at work even when you don't know it. And then look at this. We also see that our decision to live by faith in God unlocks joy in the midst of suffering. Now let's talk about talking back. How many of y'all got that rule at your house? Don't you talk back to me. You're my kid. You don't know what you're talking. Don't talk back to me. You know, the Bible's actually filled with people who talk back to God and suffered for it. In Luke chapter 1, you read the story of Zechariah, who's told, you're going to have a child, prayed for it his entire life. And all he does is talk back a little bit with some disbelief. And for the entire pregnancy of his wife, God took his voice. And then in Acts chapter 5, Ananias and Sapphira. Now, there's a lot of these examples in the Old Testament, but I picked a few from the New Testament so that you can see it's the same God. Ananias and Sapphira talk back to God because they lie to God. They say, I'm going to do this, and then they do something else, and God doesn't take their voice, actually takes their life. The thing is that Habakkuk actually shows us how to talk back to God, because there's 2 times in this book that Habakkuk comes to God, and he's really there. That's what's so distinct about this book. Much of this book is a conversation between Habakkuk and God, and it starts in the very first chapter. And look at what he's saying. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you don't listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you don't save. The law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. Now, I want you to notice some of this, because I want you to see something about Habakkuk. Habakkuk knows who God is, And he recognizes his dependence on him. He needs God. He knows he's not God. Did you notice when he says, I call out for help, God? I'm asking for you. I know I can't do it on my own. I'm showing you. I'm praying. I'm pointing out, God, look at this. Look what's happening. But you don't show up to save. In that, there's a recognition of who is God. And it's real simple for us. Who is God? Not me. I'm not God. I'm not ultimately responsible. I don't have the power to save. But you know, sometimes we act like God, don't we? You ever notice that about yourself? Well, we do. We do. We don't think we do. We might say, oh, I believe in God. I trust God. But you know, there's sometimes we act like God. How do I do that? Let me give you a few examples. We tell God what to do because we assume our way is better. God, you need to get them to do this, and if you would just tell them to do this, and God, if you could cause this to happen, and if you could just make this go away. Why? Why are we telling God what to do? Because we assume that we know better than God. It's because we are acting like God. We're our own little mini God. We doubt, here's another one, we doubt the character of God because we see ourselves as good. There's no way that a good God would allow that. Well, whose definition of good are you working from? Mine. I know what's good. There's no way a good God would allow that. A good God do this or do this. Well, again, whose? It's mine. Oh, I'm a good person. No, you're not. And I want you to hear me. The gospel doesn't work if you think you're a good person. Because if you're a good person, you're the standard. And I'm not the standard. You're not the standard. Jesus is the standard. Jesus alone, out of all of us that have walked the earth, Jesus was good. I'm not. That's why I need him. How else do we act like God? We disobey God because we think we know better. How many times has God told you to forgive somebody and you're like, no, I don't think I'm going to do that? You know the most simple way that most of us see this is money. God has a plan for your finances. Every month when you get paid, there's a little portion of that doesn't even belong to you. It's called the tithe. God gives you all of the, and he says, listen, 10% of that is mine. I just want you to return it back to me. It's a perpetuation of trust. I want you to see that I'm providing for you, and it's a constant test in your life of where you can trust me, where you can have faith in me. It's mine. Just give it back to me. I want you to see that's what it is. I'm taking care of you, and I want to see that I can trust you with it. And where do we go? You know what? I don't know that I can do that. I don't know that I can give. How could I get? I'm barely doing. Sure, I want to have a little fun on the weekend and I want to go on this trip, but I'm barely making ends meet. How am I going to give 10% away? And God's going, no, it's not yours. It's mine. That's why when you go to Malachi, which is another one of the minor prophets, one of Malachi's biggest complaints against the people of God is they're robbing God. They're not tithing. Why are they robbing? So you can't rob somebody if it's yours. They're looking at God saying, no, that's mine. And God's going, no, it's mine. And by you keeping it and you doing whatever you want to do, you're robbing me. Come on now. I know better than God. You're acting like your own God. See, the thing about Habakkuk knows he's not God. And he knows that God is the only solution to what he's going through. And here's the thing about Habakkuk. Number 2, look at this. Habakkuk wants God and the ways of God to win. More than likely, Habakkuk was a priest. He was working in a priestly office. He had significance in being able to minister to others. And in verse 4, he says, listen, the law is paralyzed. We love the law. We want the law to win. We want the law to show us how to live. But because the law is paralyzed, there's no justice. It really comes down to this statement. Look at what he says. The wicked hem in the righteous. You know what that means, hem in? It means that the wicked are minimizing the effects of the righteous on this earth. It's as if he's looking at God saying, listen, I've chosen what team I'm on. I'm on your team. I want you to win. I want your team to be the significant influencer in our world, but it looks like we're losing. I've told you this before. We need to be like Habakkuk, and it's not me that needs to win. God, I want you to win. Why? Because if Jesus wins, we all win. If you win the argument with your spouse, you win at your place of employment, you might be happy for a little while, but if it's all about you winning, eventually everybody's going to lose. But if Jesus wins, we all win. Habakkuk saw that. And so he learned something from Habakkuk. And this is number 3. This is the principle. Through humility, we can approach God with our questions. But we have to do it with humility. There's a choice in life. We either choose to humble ourselves or we choose to live through pride. And pride can come out as arrogance. I'm better than everybody. Or it can come out as insecurity. I'm worse than everybody. Pride makes me the issue. Humility makes me the non-issue. But when I make myself the issue, things turn south. And it'll happen with your questions. See, pride will turn your questions into sin. Habakkuk is wondering, God, where are you? And some of us have been there before, but our pride causes us to say, God, you're not good. God, you're not doing what you should be able to do. And God's going, who are you? Last week, we talked about learning to lament in seasons of suffering. This is a great example of that. This is a great example. Habakkuk is in a season of confusion and chaos, and he's coming to God with it. You know, some of us were taught, don't you ever talk back. Don't you talk back to me. And you might have got some spankings or some other discipline to remind you, but here's the thing. I've come to see it's healthy to have questions for Jesus. It is so healthy, but it's not healthy to question Jesus as God. I'm God. Jesus, why aren't you doing what I told you to do? And oftentimes, that pride turns our questions into sin. If we'll talk back in humility, God is going to answer. And that's really what happens here. Habakkuk questions God, and God actually answers. Look at what he says in verse 5. Look at the nations and watch. Be utterly amazed, for I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you're told. Oh, wow. What's God going to do? Oh, he's going to bring down the enemy, isn't he? He's going to make all the evil and the suffering disappear. Look at what he says in the next verse. I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings that are not there. What? Did I hear you right, God? Did I hear you? Did you just say you're raising up the Babylonians? He continues, look. Their hordes advance like a desert wind, gathering prisoners like sand. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at fortified cities by building earthen ramps to just simply capture them. They sweep past like the wind. And go on. Guilty, this is who they are. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. I want you to see something that's so important about the character of God. Where Habakkuk saw chaos, God shows him purpose. God said, you're not even going to understand this. But look out. You see the world? I'm up to something that you couldn't even perceive of. The Babylonians? You're raising them up? This is unheard of. What are you talking about? You can imagine just a mind-blown moment for Habakkuk. What? Often we understand God's will through what we would call his perfect will. Okay, this is important to understand how God is communicating to Habakkuk. God's perfect will is his perfect design for life, uncorrupted by sin. If there was never sin in the world, never sin in our lives, never sin in the hearts of other people, in our culture, in the systems of this world, and we didn't face the enemy, then God's perfect will would be accomplished. But how many of y'all know that ain't the world that we live in, right? It's been corrupted by sin, and we in our own lives can rebel against God and choose to say no. But here's the thing about God throughout the Bible. God is sovereign over all things, which means there's nothing that happens outside the power and authority of God, and that includes evil and suffering. Sometimes it's hard to understand. But God's sovereign will, not his perfect will, God's sovereign will reflects the fact that nothing exists outside of God. So while God has a perfect will, the way that he would want everything to be, if there was no such thing as sin or rebellion, God's sovereign will, the way that we live in this world, actually still exists. We are living in God's sovereign will right now. A great example of this is the book of Job. You know Job, right? It's not the story about you're flipping through and you'd lost, kind of your job, and you're like, oh, there's a book on Job. No, it's not that. It's actually a book about a guy who's really right with God. And it's as if the devil comes to God and says, you know what, they all love you because everything is good. They got it all right. And God said, I see you working down there. I know what you're up to. I know you're trying to hurt some of them. And there are some that you've taken out. That's for right. But have you considered my servant Job? God asks Satan that question. And then the devil just begins an onslaught against Job. And it's difficult to watch. I mean, Job loses everything. His physical health, his family, his friends, his financial wealth. He's being told, why don't you just curse God and die? And Job's heart, even in the middle of all that suffering, remains so faithful to God. And you find out that God is at work even in that suffering to bring up in Job's heart stuff that had not yet been addressed. And God is so good that he wasn't going to leave him from it, that he's actually going to put him in a place where, Job, let's deal with that. He used something that was so broken and so painful to bring about something that in the end was so good for Job. Job ends up in a much better place at the end of the book than he was in the beginning. Now, he went through some stuff. The Bible says in Proverbs 19, many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it's in the purpose of the Lord. It's the purpose of the Lord that will stand. God has good purposes. And they will last even through difficult seasons. So Habakkuk comes back and he talks to God again. Like, How can you be doing it? Look at what he says. I love how he addresses. Your eyes, God, are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? God responds again to him. And he says this in Habakkuk 2. The cup from the Lord's right hand is coming around you, and disgrace will cover your glory. The violence you have done to Lebanon will overwhelm you. You know, the cup of the Lord's right hand, if you remember, Jesus said, can this cup pass from me? The cup of the Lord is the cup of God's wrath. So when God says that the cup of the Lord's right hand is coming around you, he's saying, listen, there's judgment, there's wrath that's coming. And it's not just for you, but it's for those that have overwhelmed and who have abused and done wrong against my people. I want you to see something that's so good here in this moment that God shows us. That even in a season of chaos, God is working in ways that you can't see or you don't understand. You remember what he told him at the very beginning. First thing God says, you wouldn't even understand what I'm doing if I told you. If I tried to even lay out the plans, you couldn't even get your mind around it. You know why? Because God is so good. He will use an injustice to cultivate justice. God will take the things that have went wrong and somehow use the things that have went wrong to get you right. You ever been there in your life when you've taken all the wrong turns, but somehow God used that to get you in the right place? This is the kind of God that we serve. This is His sovereign will encapsulating our lives to get us in the right place. And God's showing Habakkuk that. And it's really as if God's saying, even when you don't understand it, look at what He's saying. God's in control. I'm in control. Now there's something that's really important about this book. As a matter of fact, the writing of Habakkuk gets echoed again in the book of Romans from the Apostle Paul. And it comes out of this simple verse in Habakkuk 2. Look at what he says. See, the enemy is puffed up. His desires are not upright. But the righteous person, those who are right with God, who are living the life God wants them to live, the righteous person will live by his faithfulness. Real simple. You got two ways in your life that you can live. You can live with pride, or you can live by faith. The choice to live by faith is a choice that comes out of humility. I don't have it all figured out. I don't even know it. And faith will cause me to believe in something I don't understand, I can't see, and I have no idea how it's going to work out. But it's faith, and I'm going to humble myself. Pride is I'm only going to do what I understand and what I believe, what I have control in. You've got two choices. And right there, look at what Habakkuk said. The righteous person is going to live out of faithfulness. It's impossible to live right when you're living through pride. I want you to see this in times of chaos and confusion. The only way to get things right in times of chaos is through faith. And sometimes we just don't understand it. We ain't got it all figured out. I don't know if you've ever been there, but I sure have. I don't know how I just believe in a God that I can't see, and I trust in a word that I don't quite understand, and I'm going to do some things that don't make sense. That's faith. And the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11, without faith, it's impossible to please God. I'm never going to make God happy if I only live with what I understand and with what makes sense to me. To please God, I'm going to have to humbly submit my life to Him, put myself under His authority. And Habakkuk hears this and he writes, at the end of this book, he writes a poem. It's a psalm. And it's actually, I told you last week, to lament something is to learn to process the grief, to process the sorrow, to process the disappointment. And as you process it, you express it. Some of us need to take the stuff that's been tough and difficult and the questions that we've had, and we need to get some pen to some paper and start writing some journals and start writing some poems and start putting some stuff down on paper. And in in Habakkuk 3, he writes this psalm. And it kind of wraps up beginning in verse 16. Look at what he said. I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. He's talking about when he heard what God told him about how the Babylonians were going to come eventually to be the judgment on Judah. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation that's invading us. He knows God's in control. And he knows that they're about to go through something real hard, but he also knows that the people that are going to be unjust to them will one day be judged by God himself. I see it. I've wept over it. I'm going to patiently wait for God to do what God's going to do. Look at how he wraps it up here in verse 17. Though the fig tree dies, or does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vine, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will. Think about what you would do then. I would say, God, I'll trust you. I'm going to mourn. I'm going to grieve. I'm going to lament. I'm going to keep trusting you, God. It's tough. You see what he says? Yet I will. Look at this. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. The Lord is my strength. I need somebody to see this today. Look at this. The choice to live by faith unlocks joy in the midst of deep suffering. Some of us in our lives, we don't know anything about joy because what we want is happiness. We're going off of after happiness. It's situational. If I could just get that, if this finally would fall into place. Happiness comes from control and understanding. Joy is something that's different. It's not conditional. You can have joy in the middle of the storm. You can have joy in the middle of a season of suffering. But I've come to see this about joy. The only path to joy flows through faith. You don't understand it. You don't know where you are. You don't know which way is up. But you know that God has got everything in control. He is a good God. My faith is in God, and I'm going to trust Him. And because of that, even though the world looks like it's in chaos and I don't understand where I am right now, I know that I can have joy. I can choose joy. Habakkuk dares us to see the world through faith and not fear. You know, most of us only see the world through facts, feelings, and what we understand. And because we don't have all the facts, our feelings are incomplete and we'll never understand everything. It just leaves us afraid. Habakkuk couldn't see what God was doing, and he had questions, and he humbly went to God with them. And God showed him something that he now shows us. Even when the world doesn't make sense, God is still in control. And because God is still in control, I can anchor my faith in Him. I can put my trust in Him. And even in the middle of a storm, I can choose joy. Oh, the joy of the Lord. It's going to come in the morning. The weeping might last for a night, but it comes in the morning. And the joy of the Lord is my strength. The Lord is my strength. I can find joy in the Lord, and it will cause me, even in the middle of a season that I don't understand, it'll cause me to be strong. Can we take a moment and pray right now? God, we just love you. We're so thankful for what we get to do together. be in this moment, hear your word. We're thankful for literally the writings of Habakkuk, which are hundreds, if not well over 1,000 and thousands of years old. God, thank you for this testimony of your word to the prophet and his word to us, which still matters to us today. Your word is alive. It is speaking to us. And God, as we've been listening, God, help us to see that even today there's a next step for us. Maybe right now we're looking out at the world and we don't see it the way that you see it. We've got questions. God, help us to humbly bring our questions to you. You don't have to answer them, but you will in time. But don't let us question you like we're the God and you're subject to us. Because when we do that, it turns our questions into sin. God, help us to see that even in seasons of chaos, you're in control. We can trust you. And not only can we trust you, we can put our faith in you. And God, out of that, we can experience joy. We're thankful for that. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Now, look at me. If you're in a season right now and you know that your heart is not anchored in faith into God, you've never trusted Jesus Christ to change your life, to receive you as his child, to forgive all your sins. You've never said, Jesus, I want you to be my Lord and Savior. I'm going to live life your way. You're going to be the one who's the boss of me from here on out. I'm not doing my life my way. Maybe right now is a moment that you need to pray and receive Jesus Christ as your Lord. There's such good stuff that's available to us. This is how we live life through faith in seasons of chaos. It's how we experience joy. It's through Jesus. And I'm praying right now, if that's you, you have the boldness right now to pray and receive that. And as you do that, would you click the button on our online campus? Just say, that's me. I'm raising my hand. And if you're at one of our streaming platforms, do this. Text in the phrase, I choose, to 97000. If you'll do that, it gives us a chance to follow up with you. Now listen, we love you, and I believe that for some of us as we've been watching, just God has been speaking, and we need to right now continue to stay in the flow of what God is doing. So let's take a moment right now and actually worship together.
I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. In all my days, I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me Father. I've known you as a friend, and I have lived in the goodness of God. Yes, and all my life you have been faithful, and all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Yes, 'cause your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. 'Cause your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I'm surrendered now. I give you everything. 'Cause your goodness is running after, it's running after